This is Broad Radio. For you, by you. Broad Radio. Here for more.
Hello and welcome to Broad Radio. I'm Jo Stanley and my co-host today is Zoe Daniel. Hi there, Zoe.
Hey, Jo.
Well, first up, we have to acknowledge that pretty much the world has ended because Facebook is down. So we are broadcasting on YouTube today and Twitch, which you and I don't even know what Twitch is, but we're broadcasting on it.
Perhaps someone can send us a message on YouTube to tell us what Twitch is so that we understand where we are in the world, Jo. If we're not on Facebook, I don't know where we are.
That's right. Do we even exist? Does the world exist when Facebook isn't up and about? So we do encourage you, if you're on YouTube, share that you're joining us because it'd be nice to know. But we will stream this particular episode on Facebook when it's up and about. It is coincidental and very fortuitous, actually, Zoe, because today we are speaking with a multimedia designer whose name is Laura Summers. She is a co-host on Triple R Bite Into It. And, you know, she sent us a bunch of stuff about the sorts of things that she can talk about, and none of it made sense to me. How are you with technology?
Once I've learnt it, I can do it, but I don't think my way through it, put it that way. It's just rote learning. Press that button, plug that in there, all those sorts of things. I'm good with that. But when there's a problem, that's a problem.
No, totally. My daughter says that she can never move out because I wouldn't be able to change the channel on the TV because I can't work that out. So, we're going to be speaking with Laura about AI, and I'm going to ask her, am I dumb to not care about security? Because on the whole, I've just sort of put my head in the sand. But we did feel it was time to maybe educate ourselves a little more on this day when Facebook is down. What does that even mean for the world? Is it possible that Facebook has been hacked? Who knows?
Well, we can only assume. Let's see. I'm curious to see what she has to say. I bet she has a more informed view about it than we do.
Oh, 100% guaranteed on that one. Also today, joining us, we have comedian and host of ABC TV's Chopsticks or Fork, Jennifer Wong. I love this show. I have been deep diving a lot of live streaming on my laptop, and this has been one of my favourite discoveries where they go into country Australia and discover Chinese restaurants all around our beautiful country. And oh my God, I want some lemon chicken. It's all I can think about, Zoe.
I say bring on the dumplings.
Yes. So Jen will be joining us later on. And first up, and I cannot wait for this, president of this year's AFL Premiers, the Melbourne Football Club, Kate Roffey, is going to be joining us. That's just after this. Broad Radio is proudly supported by Chemist Warehouse. Chemist Warehouse, great savings every day. So if you are watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you subscribed and, of course, share us your comments. We love that. And you can catch up on this episode and all of these other episodes in the past that we've done on our podcast, Broad Radio on the Go as well. They never go down, the podcasts. They're always available. Don't rely on Facebook. While we're giving you updates, I've got an exciting update on Broad Radio, and that is this is our last day in this particular studio that you can see around me. We are moving into some new digs at Castaway Studios, and so that means next week's show is not going to be coming to you live. We will be sharing some of our favourite moments of Broad Radio over the last oh my gosh, Zoe, since January, 9 months, I can't, what is time? I don't know. But next week, we're not going to be broadcasting live. We'll be joining you the following week live in our new studios. It's super exciting. Zoe, I wanted to mention, I'm not a cricket fan. Are you a cricket fan?
Yes, I am. You know,
good.
Some of my best childhood memories are sitting with my dad and watching cricket, and especially in that era. I mean, I'm showing my age, but Dennis Lillee, Rod Marsh, the Chappell brothers, that sort of time. And then when the one-day internationals started, when I was a bit older, in my late teens, we used to sort of sit there in the evening and watch it when I was growing up in Hobart. So definitely developed a taste for cricket. Used to go to Belrive Oval and watch the blokes play. So as you allude to, Joe, it's really nice to see the Aussie women over the last few years gaining some real prominence in this area. And of course, they played a test against India in the last few days.
Yes, and while I don't know anything about cricket, I know when history is made, and I believe that history was made on Saturday when Ellyse Perry became the first Australian man or woman to claim 300 wickets and score 5,000 runs at the international level. What an extraordinary sports person she is.
She is. And, you know, not only a cricketer, I mean, Ellyse Perry was an elite soccer star before she decided to go with cricket. So she is just one of those talented people where if you put a ball near her of any size or shape, she'll be able to do something with it. And it's funny, Joe, I was reading that actually Carlton considered trying to lure Ellyse Perry to be a sort of talent coach for their AFL women's team, with the idea that they would eventually interest her in the game to the extent that she could play in the AFLW, because her kicking technique apparently is absolutely perfect. So, you know, this is a woman who is, as you say, a superstar in the sport that she eventually chose to pursue, but could no doubt have been a superstar in several sports, and perhaps can transition to a different sport once she's decided, I've had enough of cricket.
That's amazing. And I saw, you know, there was like I think a top 10 or top 15 best, you know, cricketers sort of history. And she's like at 10 or 11 or 12 or something, and above her, of course, are all men. And I thought, but even just to be there is harder for her because she would have had less opportunity to play being a woman.
Yeah, of course. Because when you think, you know, this is something that's changed a lot in women's sport in Australia, even in the last 10 to 15 years, isn't it? I mean, you know, when I was growing up, there was no opportunity for a girl to play cricket. There was no opportunity even for a girl to play soccer, let alone footy. You know, basically we were channeled into softball and netball. They were the options that I had when I was a kid. You know, my father played AFL football, as you know. So if that had been an option for me, I would have loved to have played Aussie rules. So it's just, they do have to work harder, the women, because they haven't had that sort of cultural grounding in being able to play these sports. But then that sort of makes it even more awesome when you see someone like Ellyse Perry, who is just so innately talented, who's been able to take this on to such an extent. And the other thing that people say about her is that she's just a wonderful, humble person as well. And that, you know, she brings so much leadership to that team, as well as being hugely talented. Unfortunately, they didn't win the test. It ended up being a draw. But still, you know, I think the other thing that's worth noting, Joe, is that of her 250 internationals, only 9 have been test matches. And that's because the women don't get the opportunity to play tests. Most of their games are one-dayers. And that's kind of a shame. Like it's a bit of a missing piece that obviously needs to be built out in the women's cricket world.
Well, amazing. We're so thrilling to see someone like Ellyse Perry and the joy that she takes to the field. And yeah, I would love to see her play soccer or anything, to be honest. And I'm an AFL girl, so I love it when you see cross codes. It's just extraordinary because I can't even catch a ball. I'm terrified of balls. So people who are able to play anything that they pick up, it astounds me. Love it so much. Well, while we're on awesome sporting wins and groundbreaking moments for women, let's welcome our first guest. She is the president of the Melbourne Football Club, which only 2 weekends ago won the AFL Grand Final after 57 long years. She's also been CEO and senior executive across many different organisations, and we're thrilled to have her on Broad Radio. Hello there, Kate Roffey.
Good morning. How are you?
Oh, well, we're really great. Congratulations on Melbourne's win. I know that it's been a really busy time for you, so thank you so much for joining us today. Have you come down off cloud nine?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. People keep asking, and it's sort of, it was such a blur, and there was so much work to do around media and just club things that it was sort of hasn't really stopped in terms of that amount of work and getting back to club stuff. And I really haven't had time to just sit down and I think assess the enormity of what the club has actually done, and these, wonderful group of people who work in the club, not just the players, but the staff under our CEO, Gary Pert, the coaches and all our supporters and everyone. It's just such a huge thing. I wasn't here in Melbourne, but they tell me that the feeling here in Melbourne was quite extraordinary, even if you weren't a Melbourne Football Club supporter. Just the feeling that it gave everybody for a team that has done it tough all year. I mean, we've been travelling, the players have been away from their families for more than a month by the time we actually got back home. And it's such an extraordinary story, really. I feel like I wrote a script for a television movie, and then the next time I sort of saw it, I was watching it on the big screen.
Wow.
Kate, it was so lovely on grand final morning. I went for a run. It was a beautiful morning in Melbourne, and it actually almost gave me a tear to run around the streets and see people walking their dogs, wearing Melbourne scarves and walking around with babies in prams with their Melbourne beanies on, and so many houses with admittedly Bulldogs and Melbourne flags and scarves and decorations. There was street wars with people, having a bit of fun with that. And given that the game wasn't here and the reasons behind that, I felt it firstly sad, but also really heartwarming in many ways that Melburnians, really do see this as their game, and that even though the game wasn't here, it was two heartland Melbourne teams from very different demographics of the city, and they really embraced it. And I just, I wanted to make a comment that it was so lovely to see, especially after this year that we've had, or 2 years now. I'm curious whether, you think you're headed for a bit of a sort of Tigers pattern here, now that you've broken that nexus and won the premiership, whether you think Melbourne can continue down this path and we might see a series of flags.
Yeah, look, I'd love to think so. We have an extraordinarily deep list, and that's something that Melbourne hasn't had for a very long time. We have had the benefit of having the fabulous Darren Burgess, who's been our fitness coach for the last few seasons and really got the players unbelievably fit. I mean, we were fortunate that we had Tomo at the start of the year, had an ACL. He was out for the season, but really we didn't have that many major injuries throughout the year, which is a testament to how well they'd been prepared in the off season. So we're keeping that list together. We've got a really good culture, and that's such a critical thing in the club. So many people have commented to me, as you were just talking about the feeling around Melbourne, Zoe, so many people have said to me the way the players spoke about it all being about the team and about the club and about our supporters, and I said, well, we don't tell them to say that. That's how we feel. So when you've got those things in place, then I think you are in a great position to set yourself up to continue to challenge over the years. But any one of those things, you can make a major dent in your tilt for a premiership. Some, key injuries or COVID has just been extraordinarily difficult. I mean, we do have to just take our hats off to the AFL, the way that they've managed to keep these seasons going for the last couple of years. It has just been extraordinarily difficult. My team have been mid-air, and I've got a text saying they're not going to Gold Coast anymore. They're being diverted to Canberra, and they're coming back because we've got a COVID scare, and we don't know whether we're going to play or not this weekend. And so those sorts of challenges have been continually thrown at the AFL, and they've managed. So, in this extraordinary season, we've won away from home. We absolutely, as you say, Zoe, love to come back. Can you imagine if we were playing at the MCG for a premiership flag? It would just be extraordinary. So we're certainly, we've got one of those nice shiny cups, and I can tell you that's quite an extraordinary feeling to be able to hold that up for the first time in 57 years. But definitely we'd like to come back and win one in front of our home crowd and our home ground here, the MCG.
Kate, a lot has been said around, and I've been one of them, around the fact that there are now 3 female presidents of AFL footy clubs, and the last 2 grand finals, 3 of those 4 teams have been with female presidents. Richmond, of course, with Peggy O'Neill, Western Bulldogs with Kylie Watson-Wheeler, and now yourself with Melbourne Football Club. Is it a coincidence that the leadership is now under 3 incredible women and that they are very well performing teams?
Yeah, look, I get asked this: is it a female thing, or is it something else? The first thing is they take a long time to actually get these teams and these clubs to success. So it's certainly not just me, and Peggy would be the first, and Kylie also, to say we're links in a chain of people that have come before us. But I think the major reflection is that this is good contemporary leadership and good contemporary governance, and I don't think that's necessarily a male or a female thing. I think that's good governance. There is a difference, I think, just in the way that we approach interacting with our players or our coaches or our staff, and that's different for each of us. Peggy and Kylie and I know each other well, and we all go about things differently. But I think it does. Daisy Pearce, I think people kept asking me, what is it? What's going on? What have you done here? And Daisy, in the commentary after the match, when we were down on the field, when I finally saw the replay about it 3 or 4 days after the game, she said, that's the president, Kate Roffey. She's had a very calming influence on the club, and I think that's probably what. To put it in a nutshell, I think Daisy summed up possibly what has changed really at our club. That last little bit. I'm a very calm person. I tend not to worry, not to get stressed, and I look at big challenges or obstacles, and I go, okay, well, it's just an obstacle. We can get over it. We can get around it, but there is a way to actually deal with it. And I think that's me personally, and that has made a change for our club. That's a final piece of a puzzle that we've been working on for a long time. It'll be different for Kylie, and it'll be different for Peggy, as it'd be different for Luke Sayers at Carlton, and it would be different for Russell over at West Coast. So we're all different, but I think 4 of the last 5 premierships have been won by female presidents now, so there must be something in the water.
I think it's remarkable.
It is, and there's been huge progress in other parts of the game too, obviously, not only with the AFLW, but you mentioned Daisy Pearce, being part of the commentary team. We have other, prominent female commentators now. When I was growing up watching footy, that would have been something that would not have happened. Like it just was not even a figment of anyone's imagination, I don't think, that you'd have female commentators. But I'm wondering, Kate, just how many barriers you still experienced. I interviewed Tanya Hosh recently, the AFL's Indigenous manager, who's an incredible woman as well. And I asked her, do you ever have moments still in the boardroom or whatever where you just sort of go, oh, gee, sort of rolling your eyes thinking what's going on here? And she just laughed her head off and said, well, what do you think? Of course, it's still a battle. Do you have those moments as well where you think, gee, there's a lot that still needs to shift?
Oh, absolutely, Zoe. I mean, I think for any females in first positions or leadership positions, you'll always have them. So I was, for example, the first female chair of an organisation that looked after shipping channels here in Victoria, and you come across first. I was virtually the only female in that whole organisation at a senior level, in fact. But it's one of the things I look at and I go, being a president of a football club is huge, particularly here in Victoria. I mean, you will never ever do anything else like it in your life. It's difficult to explain the nature of these roles. But when I was asked by my board to step up into the president's role, I knew that 50% of it is being president of an AFL club, and 50% of it is being a female president of an AFL club, and I fully embrace that. I mean, that's really important to me, and seeing those obstacles, as I said, or seeing those barriers, to me, it's not something that I look at and go, I can't do it. I go, okay, well, we've got to chip away at this wall and actually make people understand that this is okay, and this is going to be the future. I mean, we will see more female presidents. Peggy, one of the things that we spoke about when I was first appointed, and she said, I was really worried that I would finish my tenure as a female president of a club, and there would be no other females here. And she said, no, I've got 2. And to her, that was really important, that, it's a sign of the changing times. We still need to get a lot better. I mean, we don't have a female CEO. There's been very few in professional sport. You just mentioning cricket previously. The A-League have had Eugenie Buckley's been up there at Brisbane. We had Rachel in the NRL, but there aren't many women coming through there. And I think you can see a sort of balance when you talk about is it a women's thing or what's happening with these AFL clubs. It's bringing certainly a different perspective and balance, and people are starting to look at it and go, not necessarily has to be a female, but a different approach, I think, is what we're seeing in that contemporary governance and compassionate leadership. And I think this is something we've seen in COVID. As we talk about what has changed a lot, we are becoming compassionate leaders as opposed to the old-fashioned dictatorial style leaders. I think that's something I've seen a lot through the COVID impact in the last couple of years.
Are you aware, Kate, of the magnitude for other women and girls who see someone such as yourself? And Peggy, I have actually asked Peggy this a while ago as well, that you know, there's great significance for everybody else and all the women and girls who want to see trailblazers like you. Are you aware of that magnitude?
Not really. I think I just go about my job. Sometimes I forget I'm even the president of an AFL club, and they'll go, "Oh, Kate Roffey, the president." I go, "Oh, that's me," because I go about my business, and you know, I try to do my job as best I can, and you know, make as few mistakes as I can. But that's certainly you know, bound to happen as I go along. So I just do my bit, and then I get an extraordinary number of, you know, wonderful messages from people I do and people I don't know, just saying thank you, or you know, that you're inspiring them to do something different. And at one game, a dad came up with his 11-year-old daughter, and he stopped me as I was walking around the concourse, and he said, "Hi, Kate, this is my young daughter. She's seen you speak, I think it was on a podcast or something, and she wanted to come up and say hello because you've inspired her to do something good." And when you get a little bit of feedback like that, you not necessarily think how much impact you might be having, but you think whatever trouble I have or however difficult my day might seem, to have someone who feels that way, then all of those challenges and obstacles are certainly worth the effort. Because I always say, don't do what I've done, do more than I do. I'll get us as far as I can, you know, chipping down this road and clearing the weeds. But for the people coming after me, young men, young women, you know, do more. I'll clear the path as far as I can. Then it's up to you to, as all the great women before me have chipped away at the path to make it easier for me, then, you know, I'll chip away as much as I can to make it easier for them to get further forward.
Do you get much blowback, Kate? There was an article, and you know, I hate to point it out, by Steve Price, who was sort of arguing that we shouldn't be taking an aggressive stance on gender equality. His view was that we should be having a politely argued discussion about it. So that's great advice. Thanks, Steve. But it just occurred to me that from your perspective, it might be a hard road to hoe sometimes. And how do you manage that backswing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always say, as soon as you stand up and you know, try to lead in some way or you know, march your troops to the top of the hill, you get a massive big target on your back, and people, you know, like to have a ping at it. For every, you know, positive comment you get, occasionally through comes the Steve Price sort of, you know, that was way back when I started, so I didn't read it. Someone sent me the article, and it was something like I should focus on football instead of the gender wars. Yeah. Well, Steve, I think I'm doing, you know, I'm a female, I can multitask, so I think I've done pretty well with both there. The female element of it doesn't seem to be suffering, and certainly our football side of things has done nothing but improve. So, you know, you'll always get those things, and it's like being in politics or anything else. If you don't want the target on your back, don't take the job. So that's just part and parcel of having these roles. Like I said, things are great at the moment. Things will go wrong, and then, you know, I get to stand up and front the media and represent the club in the best of times. Now I'm sure there'll be bad times when I have to stand up and front it. That's just part of the job. You represent your club in the good times. You represent your club in the bad times, and you know, that's just the way you do it. Like I said, if you don't want to get smacked with the media stick every so often, then certainly don't stand up there holding the cup on the stage as the Premiership president.
You mentioned shipping just before, Kate, and one of the most fascinating conversations I've had on the phone was when you and I spoke maybe a year ago, and you were telling me about shipping in Melbourne, and I was like, oh my God, the things you know, I am so fascinated. And so your life obviously at Melbourne is voluntary, and you have a whole massive career outside of that, and it's shipping and it's trains, and you're at City of Wyndham doing incredible things there. What is something in your career and your working day that lights you up the most?
I think for me, it's this thing of if there's the biggest challenge. So, as you just mentioned, Joe, we're aiming to build Australia's first privately owned rectangular stadium using something we call value capture, which is a commercial funding style model. It hasn't been done before. So I look at that and go, fantastic, let's give this a crack. Other people look at it and go, this is just ridiculous, don't even bother. So it's those sorts of things that are the unknown, uncharted territory. I'm not a worker or a CEO or a staff member who's happy to just kick a tin down the road. I want to always do something different. So it's those things that everyone else would just go, this is too big, this is just too much of a challenge. I mean, I've got a very puzzly sort of mind in that if my watch stops working, I'll pull it apart and see what's gone wrong and put it back together so it works again. So I've always been sort of a person who likes to work out intricate puzzles and untangle things. So I just look at each of those things as another opportunity to actually say, don't tell me no, we'll find a way to do it. We just got to stick to the task. So I think those are the things that really excite me and get me up in the morning, not the things that, I've got to do my budget again, or I've got to do my fill in my reports for HR or whatever. Those sorts of things don't really get me that excited, but the unknown and the unusual and the uncharted territory is, I should have been, an explorer back in the day, like Christopher Columbus or James Cook or something like that, I think. But no, so the unknown really, a lot of people fear it. I just go, great, how exciting, something that someone hasn't done before. It's, it gets me up, it gets me fascinated and wakes me up in the morning.
Wow, that's so interesting, because at the moment all we hear is how we're terrified of the unknown, and that's the thing that's causing us so much anxiety. But you embrace it. I love that.
Absolutely. I mean, out of COVID, it's come all sorts of things. I can do, 5 or 6 talks a day. Before you could do 1 or 2 because you just couldn't make your way physically to things. I could work for a company in Paris online. So there's all sorts of different things. Yes, it's unknown, but embrace. We don't have a choice. COVID, you don't get to opt out of COVID. So it is as it is. Let's actually see what we can do with it and change the way we operate so that we're better when we come through this at the other, because we will come through it. We're resilient. The human race is a very resilient group of people. So we'll get through it, and out of it will come things that we never expected to come out of it.
Awesome. Kate Roffey, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's just been a delight to speak with you on Broad Radio.
Thank you. Thanks everyone out there, and go well.
Yes, you too. We'll have more Broad Radio after this. Well, Zoe, at the top of the show, we did establish that you and I are not technologically connected or particularly savvy. But as they say, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And if technology is our enemy, well, perhaps we should learn a little bit more about it rather than bury our heads in the sand. So we welcome to the show now multimedia designer and from Byte Into It on 3RRR, Laura Summers. Hi there, Laura.
Hey, hi. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, you're joining us on a day when Facebook is down, which means the end of the world for so many people. What's happened? How can such a giant just disappear off the face of the internet?
Oh, look, I think that's the question everyone's asking right now, and we don't really have answers. Hey, there's been some news has come through saying they think it's a DNS issue. DNS is domain name server, and you might think of it like the phone book of the internet. It's the thing that sort of tells the computers that are trying to connect to servers where to go and which servers they're connecting to. So it sends all those bytes of data around the internet, and without DNS, we don't have an internet. So yeah, it's really been a bit of a disaster. Everything is down. Instagram is down. Facebook is down. Messenger. I was reading a piece on Ars Technica saying that apparently there were reports when the outage first started that Facebook employees couldn't use their key passes to get into the building to start to assess the problem itself. So that's pretty hilarious to think that like so many systems are consolidated and tied into that one thing that you couldn't even get into the building to start to assess the state of the damage. That's actually quite funny.
Isn't there a geek in a basement somewhere who can fix it?
Gosh, don't we all wish we had that geek in the basement? It's like we all need a wife and we all need a geek in the basement.
But Laura, is it possible that this is part of an elaborate conspiracy? I mean, we've seen this coverage around in the last week of the Facebook files. There was a Facebook whistleblower who's come out saying, Facebook knows how much harm it's causing. It knows the flaws in its system, yet it doesn't do anything. And then Facebook disappears off the internet. I mean, it couldn't be any more perfect.
Yeah, look, it's certainly good fodder for conspiracy theorists. Hey, like there's a bunch of fun, ridiculous stuff floating around Reddit and Twitter. I saw one that said that it was a convenient self-own, that Facebook did it on purpose to basically avoid getting scrutiny from this whistleblower 60 Minutes interview that happened on Sunday night, I think. And there's also people saying it was a hack. So it's some kind of retribution or retaliation for all of this bad behavior we've seen from Facebook over the past, decade, I guess. But yeah, look, it's hard to know if there's much truth to any of that. There's also, there's this, like dark web trove of Facebook data, which has been supposedly put up for auction. I think it's something like 1.5 billion records, but it's questionable whether there's actually any data there, and B, if there is, if it's anything other than just like scraping what's actually publicly available on Facebook. So there's a difference between like an actual data breach and scraping what's actually available and sort of publicly up already. And so there's plenty of conspiracy going around, but I wouldn't put too much stock in any of it, to be honest.
Well, what do you make of the Facebook files? I'm interested in how you read that. In that, like I was saying to Joe earlier, that I was in DC working as a correspondent when Mark Zuckerberg appeared before Congress, and this is, I don't know, it must be 3 years ago now. And so Facebook's had a lot of scrutiny for a long time about the sort of negative social impact that it's having, privacy issues and misinformation and all those sorts of things. Yet it continues to operate. People keep using it. Obviously, some people jumped off it, but a lot of people are still on it. So we don't necessarily see anything changing despite all this negative information coming out. Do you think the Facebook files will move the needle at all?
Look, it's hard to say because Facebook has weathered so many like obvious problems already. Like if you think like if Cambridge Analytica and the obvious, like, that we know that we were hacked by Russians. We know that, there was like very serious misinformation issues happening. That was a deliberate attempt to intervene on the US electoral process back in 2016. And that didn't impact us. Like that didn't change the regulation, that didn't cause Facebook to get broken up. So I would probably fall down the side of, I'm a little bit cynical and a little bit dirty on this. I'm not really convinced that any kind of problem would cause Facebook to face real consequences. But there have been whispers that there should be some kind of breakdown Facebook antitrust law coming from the US government, and that it might happen during Joe Biden's administration. So look, that would be probably the ideal outcome, but I don't know if it's going to happen. And they're going to have to build a very strong case. And it's unlike traditional antitrust law where you're talking about people rorting prices, right? You're talking about people saying, well, you're here at my spa and there's nowhere else to eat, so I'm going to charge you $100 for, a coffee. And it's like, of course, that's a form of monopoly. It's not okay. That's not actually the case with Facebook because people don't pay for the product. So you have to find an alternate way of showing the harms and measuring those harms and saying that that's not okay. But certainly with this current issue of the whole essentially internet, it feels like going down, it's a strong argument that the consolidation of these services, like all of these apps that used to be separate companies, like Instagram was not always owned by Facebook. Neither was Oculus, neither was YouTube, neither was WhatsApp. So this all used to be hosted separately. And you could think of that as like a sort of, greener forest with different kinds of trees. And now we're all the same forest with the one kind of tree. And as we can see, when something goes wrong, it impacts all these services. And it means that the overall ecosystem is much less resilient. So I think that in itself is a strong argument for breaking up Facebook and maybe like seeing a return to a smaller, more sustainable size of tech company. But it's certainly not going to happen overnight. If it does happen at all, it might take 3 years, 5 years.
But one of the problems, and Zoe and I were talking about this earlier off the show, is that people like myself, I just keep using Facebook because I guess I don't really think about the harm. I don't think about what kind of data they are taking from me because that's the price I pay. I sign a deal with the devil and I use Facebook. I mean, we stream on Facebook every week usually. So we rely on Facebook for Broad Radio currently. And to me, that's one of the reasons we wanted to get you on the show, because I'm someone who, I've just got my head in the sand. I don't even know what AI is. I keep reading that at some point it's going to take over the world and we're all going to be destroyed by AI. I've seen The Matrix. I know. But you don't kind of, we don't sort of engage with actually what it really means and how perhaps at risk we might be.
Yeah, look, I probably come down on the side of it shouldn't be on individuals to know or to protect themselves, right? Like that is the job of regulation. And I think it's a little bit unfair to point fingers at people and be like, oh, well, you should have gotten off Facebook if you didn't want this to happen to you. It's in many ways the de facto platform of the internet. So it's like saying, just don't be on the internet, which is kind of patently ridiculous, right? Like you can't tell people to not participate in society or to not share their content. And particularly when you talk about a social media platform, the issue is with the network effects. So if you move to some other platform where, it might have much better ethics and it might be less of a problematic company, but you've only got 10 of your closest friends there, it doesn't really help produce work or get it out in the world, right? So certainly there are lots of things to know, and there are ways to protect yourself. Like you can go into your Facebook settings, click like 6 times and turn off all of the privacy tracking things. So you can make your account less public, and you can make it harder for people to find you, and you can make sure that your public information.
Why would I make my account less public? That's mad. I want the world to know everything about me. What's the point of it?
But this is the thing, like the system isn't designed to help you, an individual. It's designed to help itself. So it doesn't have your interests in mind when it's thinking about how to make that stuff available.
Well, probably that's one of the things we should go into it with our eyes wide open. It's not really for us. It's for them to make a lot of money. Can we move away from Facebook and ask you,
Sure.
One of the key reasons we wanted to talk to you was this notion of AI and what is it? And is it actually in existence now? And are we at risk?
Great question. AI is a terrible term that is so overused and has so much what people in tech call namespace clashing, which basically just means too many words that are, or too many concepts that are loaded on the one word. So AI, people talk about it, and they talk about the Terminator, and they talk about her, and like this idea of a consciousness that's in a computer, and that's nothing like the tech we have today. The tech we have today is called narrow or weak AI, and it basically is, you can think of it like fancy pattern matching. That's kind of the simplest way I can describe it. It's not really like a consciousness. It doesn't have a sense of time, doesn't have a sense of memory. It doesn't know the difference between itself and the outside world. It's just being shown a bunch of data, and it's trying to match patterns. So yeah, like the thing that AI like is there for is helping recommendation systems know what to recommend next, or trying to match faces it's seen in the past to faces that it's being shown now. But all of these systems, they don't generalize. So when we think about intelligence or consciousness, we think about this idea that you could learn something and then, take that same concept to the next task that you have to do. But to just try and ground this, if you had a computer vision model and it was looking at faces and you're like, here's a face, here's a picture of me, does it match anything in the database? It could spit out and say, strong match or weak match. But that same model couldn't tell the difference between a gorilla and a monkey or a cat and a dog, right? It doesn't generalize in any meaningful way, and it doesn't have any kind of sense of self to know what these things are that it's learning. It's just literally saying, I think this is similar to what I've seen in the past or not. So we have this problem that we keep anthropomorphizing the machine and thinking it's much smarter and more, like human-like than it is, whereas most of this technology is really quite straightforward at the core and quite dumb and can go wrong really easily. I actually had some examples of ways it can go wrong if you want to hear. They're quite ridiculous.
Will it terrify me? Will I have nightmares?
Well, I mean, it might help you feel like less terrified because it's so silly, right? Like, I think that's maybe useful to like kind of break down the marketing gloss and be like, well, look, actually, it's quite silly. Like, there's a kind of apocryphal story about this, which is a model that was trying to learn the difference between a husky and a wolf. So like husky dogs and wolves, and they're pretty similar looking. So you can argue that might be a hard challenge even for some people. But they fed it a bunch of images and it got really good really fast. And they're like, oh, wow, our model is so great. It's learning the difference between husky and wolf. And then they did this thing where they tried to determine what the model was looking at in the images. So what features in the pictures it thought was of interest. And what it turned out was that the model had learned the difference between snow and no snow. So where there were wolves, there was always snow in the background. And where there were not wolves, there was no snow in the background. And that was the only salient feature that that model had learned. So while they thought they had got this really subtle image problem solved, in fact, they had just like got it to learn snow or no snow. And that's that kind of, it's called shortcut learning. And that kind of like learning this feature that people didn't recognize was there in the data that they were feeding it. That's a really common problem in most kinds of machine learning.
So Laura, we talked about Facebook being for itself and not necessarily being for us. And so I'm therefore wondering about AI. Is it good for us or not?
I mean, our computer is good for us. Are our phones good for us? Like it's like, you know, yes and no, of course. Like it's a bit of both. I think AI has lots of potential. There's lots of amazing things it could be doing, but I think we have to think deeply about what values we want to protect when we build technology, and we have to think about what optimizations we're setting ourselves. Like, what are our goals? What do we want the tech to do for us? If we purely accept other people's goals, we're going to have to understand that they're probably not going to be in our own best interests. So I think maybe the like long answer short is it's on us to try and set some goals for ourselves and work out if we can use technology to reach those goals rather than just, you know, blindly accepting whatever is given to us, especially from big corporates like Facebook.
So just to wrap up, I need to then ask the question, is Zoe's husband and myself, are we crazy in saying we will not have a Hey Google or Alexa in our house because we don't trust it?
I'm 100% behind that decision. I think of them as little surveillance robots that I won't have one in my house either. Did you see there's a new Amazon dog, and it just looks, it walks around the house and like maps your house and sends all that data back to Amazon. Like it's like inviting a little, yeah. It's
I don't like that at all.
No, me neither. I think like if it really solves a problem for you, it's probably like, you know, go for it, I guess. Like, but I certainly don't think the problems it could solve for me outweigh the kind of creepiness of like essentially inviting a surveillance device into my home. I don't really like it.
Oh, I feel so vindicated. I love it. I can't wait to go out and tell the world I told you so. Laura, thank you so much for that very illuminating conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. And we'll have more Broad Radio after this.
With my respiratory issues, I know I have to quit smoking. And quitting before I'm 40 means I'll live up to 9 years longer. What will your future hold when you quit? Make your next quit attempt at Chemist Warehouse.
Broad Radio. Talking inspo we love, info we need, and sharing more of us. Watch and listen live every Tuesday 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time at broadradio.com.au or find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube and LinkedIn at Broad Radio Oz. Talk to us live. Call on 1300 8 Broad. Catch up on demand anytime, anywhere, every time, everywhere. On the train, we'll be here. 2 a.m. existential crisis, we've got you covered. Broad Radio. Here for more.
Well, Zoe, I have discovered a little gem on ABC iView that I absolutely love. It's called Chopsticks or Fork, in which the host travels the country discovering all of those beautiful Chinese restaurants that are the backbone of every country town. I love them. I'm mad for Chinese food. It's hosted by comedian Jennifer Wong, and she joins us now. Hi, Jen.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, really great. Congratulations on your show. I know that you probably shot it pre-COVID, did you?
No, we actually shot it during COVID, which was a very difficult thing to do, to hop into a place and then like leave before anything happened. We were in South Australia and left South Australia the night they went into lockdown. So it was just, the gods were very kind to us. This film during COVID, it was very tight.
It's such an amazing idea, Jen. And, you know, Jo referenced the fact that she grew up eating Chinese food in a country town, as did I. I'm from Launceston. And I grew up in an era where it was basically you went to the pub for a counter meal or you went to the Chinese restaurant for dinner. And that was special occasion food. You know, it's a very different era, wasn't it, when, you know, totally. In the 70s and 80s, the idea of going out for dinner was a huge deal, whereas now, well, in the before times, before COVID, we'd sort of go out for dinner willy-nilly and not think anything of it. So on that basis, how big a cultural institution are these country town Chinese restaurants?
It's incredible. And I think the reason why people have been so kind and lovely about this show is that it brings out a real sense of nostalgia for them. Like you said, Zoe, you know, it's often the first place that many people in country towns would have eaten outside their own home if it wasn't for the pub. You know, some of the country towns, it's not that the Chinese restaurant was the only Chinese in town. Sometimes they were the only restaurant in town. So as a place for, you know, 18th and engagement parties and birthday parties and that kind of thing, there's such a sense of going to celebrate at these places, as well as, you know, picking up a couple of dishes on the way home from swimming on a Tuesday night. You know, we were in the Atherton Tablelands in Queensland and had stumbled upon a table where a guy in his late 20s was dining with his wife and his brother and his brother's partner, and they'd grown up at this restaurant eating as kids, but now they were celebrating a birthday, and so they were getting the $39 banquet menu you know, on a Thursday night and just having a great time of it. You know, they had a newborn with them, and you could just tell that this family is just going to keep going, like generation after generation, in the same way that the restaurants are often handed down from one generation to the next. So as much as it is about getting, you know, lemon chicken or honey prawns or that kind of thing, it's actually the place of it has a huge sense of heart and warmth for a lot of people.
Oh, there's so much about the show I really love. It really made me want to travel through Australia and discover these beautiful towns. So you capture that beautifully. But also the history of Chinese food in Australia. Like, it's just generation after generation. And yes, for me, so I grew up suburban Melbourne, right? My grandparents were missionaries in China, right?
Wow.
Crazy. I know,
that
crazy,
is so
right?
interesting. I wonder what they ate.
Well, oh gosh, in the 20s and 30s, I don't know what I really don't know. It was remote, like, you know, country, I don't know what part of China, but so I grew up, same as Zoe said, special occasion for birthdays, my grandparents would get Chinese food, and it was such a treat because back then the only takeaway was fish and chips and Chinese food in the 80s. That was it, right? So Chinese food, so amazing with my grandparents, but you know what? I used to just cringe because they insisted on cooking their own rice. And they would not buy the rice.
They're very Chinese, in my opinion, Jo. I ordered some Thai food last night, and I also refused to pay $4.50 for the rice. So as soon as I ordered the food, I put the rice on my rice cooker. They probably know that an Asian person has bought these two dishes because of the lack of jasmine rice in their order. So congratulations to your family. I hope you will pick up the seem very extremely important to eat Chinese food when
Oh,
you
no.
do take away.
I've tried to introduce that to my family, and my husband and daughter are like, how tight are you? Just get the rice off the menu. And I'm like, that's what my grandfather used to do. You'd always put the rice cooker on as you went and got the Chinese.
Yeah.
I have to admit that we do that in our house. We actually cook the rice. It is tragic, but you know, if you've got big eating teenage children and you're going to spend like $12 on rice, then how many kilos of rice can that buy you?
That's right. It could practically buy you another dish. You know, you'd rather spend that $12 on, you know, another portion of, I don't know, spring rolls or something. And I think it's time that we, you know, cognitive behavioral therapy, change our language and thinking around this. Instead of Zoe saying, I have to admit, it should be a like, I never pay for rice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's nothing to be ashamed of. It should be a badge of honor. So congratulations to everyone. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we are the house that cooks our own rice. But Jen, you know, you mentioned Thai food, and I lived in Thailand for several years, and I'm always sort of interested when I go to a Thai restaurant in Australia how different the Thai restaurant food here is to eating Thai food in Thailand. And I'm just wondering how much Chinese food has kind of hybridized over the years, and also how much those restaurants have changed since those times in the 70s and 80s when Joe and I were kids and we were going for our birthday to the Chinese restaurant. Is the food the same? I mean, is it still lemon chicken and honey soy prawns, or has it developed and changed over that period?
It really depends where you go. So there's a restaurant that we went to in Moree called New Bowa, and the thing with that restaurant is that the menu hasn't changed since the 70s. So when we were there, we had a table of people in the 80s and 90s gathering for their regular birthday meals. Every year they've been coming there for the last 40 years when someone has a birthday. And so they were eating food with a knife and fork that they'd been eating since 40 years ago. But restaurants that are changing with the times and with people's palates, you know, I know in the cities of Sydney and Melbourne, Queensland, Darwin, there's just been a lot of changes in the types of Chinese food that are available now that wouldn't have been available when you guys were eating in country towns in the 70s and 80s, you know, like in Sydney and Melbourne, there's heaps of food that you can get, Shanghainese food, Yunnan food, not just food that's Cantonese food, which is traditionally what these restaurants are serving. So the restaurant that we went to in Malua Bay, which is called Ravens at Malua Bay, they do an amazing honey prawn. But the special thing about their honey prawn is that they use local honey from the nearby town of Mogo, which you might remember was in the bushfires last year. You know, so they've got dishes like deep fried eggplant, which wouldn't have existed back in the 70s because people weren't eating eggplant. So the chef, Raymond, he's, you know, like a traditionally trained Cantonese chef, duck on the menu sometimes. You know, if you show up with a lobster that you've caught, he'll cook it up for you. So there's that sense of this could be a kitchen that's in Sydney or Melbourne. It's very with the times. But then in the country towns, I think people don't want it to change. There was one family who we met in Atherton Tablelands, Tina and Andy, and they said that they've been trying to introduce some new dishes because they're from China. They came here about 7 years ago. And so a lot of the food to them when they arrived was completely foreign. They'd never seen lemon chicken before. They did not know this sweet and sour pork. And so they're trying to introduce things on their menu like salted egg yolk deep fried prawn, which is like a real delicacy. And the people are like, even when they're getting it for free, they're like really like the old menu. So for people, it's different. You know, you can go for nostalgic reasons or you can go to challenge your palate, but they're probably two different types of things that people are going for. And some of these restaurants offer nostalgia. You know, eating a deep fried ice cream for me was like time travel. I hadn't had one since I was 8 years old. And it's that kind of wonder that is captured by visiting these restaurants. And I think a lot of people are pretty keen to go and discover that again when borders opens. it's such a happy thing to eat something that you loved when you were little.
Yes, and that episode with the deep fried ice cream, it comes with an actual demonstration of how they cook deep fried ice cream, which I was fascinated by because my entire life I've been going, how do they have ice cream in the deep fryer and it doesn't just, it's just amazing.
It's like cold and hot.
It's like a miracle of chemistry. And you've actually then also answered my question that I've long since had, Jen, which is the Chinese, what we identify as Chinese food here in Australia is probably not what Chinese food is. Would that be true?
I think it's really appropriate to call it Australian Chinese food. Like it's clearly a type of food. It's a type of food that we see in Australia. Interesting because some viewers in New Zealand have watched it, and there are some that we don't do in New Zealand. So, it's a type of food that exists very much in Australia. It is a little sweeter than Cantonese food usually would be. There's a bit of a deep fried and battered foods, which are not the foods that I would have eaten at home growing up. So I think it's fair to say that this is a distinct category. It's Australian food.
Mm. Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
So who's
you're
the
not
first
going to go
person?
to China to.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say you're not going to go to China to order lemon chicken, basically.
Right.
Like people that dined at the restaurant in Moree have come back from traveling to Beijing and Shanghai and said the food here is much better. Like the food at Moree is much better. You grow up with. So yeah.
I mean, that makes me wonder who then back in the 60s or 70s was the first to start cooking that food that became universally in Australia Chinese food, because if it's not come from China, a genius.
A genius.
Exactly. Oh, too funny. So Jen, to get away from your amazing show, I see that you are hosting a live comedy show, which we're in Melbourne. So the idea of there being a big event in which people can gather and see live entertainment is blowing my mind. This is happening in Adelaide. You're in Sydney. How is this going to happen?
I'm going to quarantine for 2 weeks in order to do the show. And so the lineup that you see there is mostly made up of people from Melbourne and Sydney. And unfortunately, they're not going to be able to be at the show because of border restrictions. So we've actually reassembled a local team of comics and sketch performers and musical comedy people, and also Dilruk from Melbourne, Dilruk Jaya Sinha will also be there from Melbourne. So the only from Sydney and Melbourne who will be there are my Dilruk. And it's just going to be a real laugh because we've got a live band to play as well, so people can enjoy live music and comedy at the same time. So it's a little bit different to your regular it's part of the Oz Asia Festival, so there's heaps of stuff that's actually going to be on in Adelaide, which just makes all the other states so jealous. But it's, as you say, it's really it's been so long between gigs just because of the fact that people haven't been able to gather. So we're really, really excited to be able to bring a live show to Adelaide.
That's awesome. It's going to be fantastic. I'm so envious, and also I'm absolutely starving now.
I know. Is it too early
feeling, Zoe?
I mean, honestly, is it too early for some lemon
sweet and sour pork for lunch?
Well, I mean, but we have to we do have to ask the question though before we let you go, Jen. Zoe, are you chopsticks or fork?
Chopsticks. 100% chopsticks. Yeah.
Oh, I feel shamed now. I can use chopsticks.
There is no shame.
Well,
there is no shame. You know what? I think we should all use spoons, Frank. Like, it's just the easiest way to get food from the bowl to your mouth. Just whatever works.
That's it. I mean,
right.
I can use chopsticks. It just takes too long. And I like to eat as fast as I can, to shovel it in and be as full as I possibly can. Right. And so
well, you know, Joe, In Thailand, people don't usually use chopsticks, and because I lived in Cambodia and Thailand for 5 years, the method of eating is fork and spoon. So that is a much easier combination, and certainly if we have Southeast Asian food, that's what we'd be using.
I support that. If I could, I would hold the bowl to my mouth and just shovel it in that way.
Oh, but you do know that the way that Chinese food eat rice is you do hold the bowl to your mouth. So no one's expecting you to use chopsticks to eat rice. So you bring the bowl to your mouth and you use the chopsticks to just spoon it in, if you will.
Scoop it in, yeah.
Scoop it in. It's a new method of eating Jo's discovered. Scoop it in.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. Jen, it's just been a delight to chat with you, and thanks for your show. I really do. It's just, it's been a joy for me to discover parts of Australia and those beautiful country towns and the people in them. And yeah, I'm getting Chinese food for dinner for sure.
Amazing. Don't forget to put the rice on. Thanks, Jo. Thanks, Zoe.
Thanks, Jen. Oh, geez. Zoe, what a fun show. Super fun show.
Good. And I actually am legitimately hungry. I'm going to have to go and find some dumplings.
What's your dumpling of choice?
Oh, I don't know. Just like a steamed pork and leek, something like that. Yeah. I mean, I'd eat a wide variety of dumplings, quite frankly. If someone put a plate in front of me, I would eat them. Wouldn't really matter what type.
Oh, well, I think dumplings and only dumplings is a legitimate meal as well. If that's all you want to do, I totally support that. I've done that before. Just give me, I'll have steamed and fried. How about that?
Righto. You'll support that.
Yeah. I want to say thank you to you also, Zoe, before we finish the show today, for your beautiful photos on Instagram. I'm living for your just photography of the bay in Melbourne. Look at that. These are
my running shots.
Yeah, God,
I love taking photos, and obviously, I've been a broadcast journalist for a long time, so I've always taken a lot of photos in the course of my work, but these are just my snaps that I take when I go out running most days along the bay, and I do feel very lucky to have that horizon within my few kilometres that I'm able to access. It does make a difference to be able to look out into infinity.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I know that there are people who haven't had the bay or the sea or a beach of any kind within their 5, 10 or 15 Ks, whatever restriction we're on at the moment. And those photos have been really, really lovely. It kind of just, there's something about looking at that blue sky, the water, and yeah, as you say, the horizon that kind of calms you a little.
Yeah, and you're right. A lot of people don't have access to be able to see that. I think a lot of people, though, have been going out and finding the nice bits of their local suburbs, and that has been one upside of the various lockdowns that people have done a lot of exploring. But certainly where I live in Bayside, Melbourne, I'm very blessed to be able to see that when I walk down to the water. And today, Jo, it's kind of like hurricane conditions outside, but even that has its appeal. That bay, it's different every day. The seasons change, the days change, the mornings, the evenings. It just is different every time you go there. You get something different from it.
It's true. I saw dolphins in the bay the other day. Like literally in inner city Melbourne, there were dolphins frolicking. Beautiful. Oh, lifts your soul. So thank you so much for joining me this week, and we'll have you again soon on Broad Radio. Next week, we're not joining you live. We'll just play some of our favourite parts of Broad Radio, and we'll join you live the following week from our new studios. In the meantime, stay well. You take care, Zoe.
Nice to see you always.
Yeah, we'll see you on Broadway Radio next time. Bye-bye.